we're talking about legacy vendors. And it seems to me that spotting a legacy vendor in the storage jungle can be tricky because the definition of legacy is fuzzy. So we're trying to cast some light on that today. It's partly a consequence of longevity. Spectrum Scale is undeniably a legacy parallel file system. Its roots go back to GPFS in 1998, 22 years ago. Similarly, IBM itself is a legacy vendor. Its roots go back even further to 1911, 110 years ago. But legacy is also a matter of approach, which can change. IBM itself, for example, has continually reinvented itself, not least by buying in new vendors with new technology such as XIV and its all-flash array, which IBM acquired in 2007. Liran, the co-founder and CEO of Weka, joined XIV in 2005 as a principal software architect, stayed through the IBM acquisition, where he was running XIV's hardware and platform groups, and then left in 2011. He went a long way away. He co-founded Fusic, which lets consumers fuse their own videos of singing a song with a YouTube MTV video of real artists singing the same song, a kind of online video karaoke. That's about as far away as you can get from enterprise storage. But then he left and came back, starting at Weka with two other XIV execs in January 2014. So for these three, XIV was something they left behind and then built on, a legacy itself. Liran, what did you take away from that legacy technology from XIV?
Thanks, Chris. And like just like I said, each time talking with you is a pleasure. When we were acquired by IBM, they acquired us because we were able to disrupt the block storage well over a decade ago. And then we came into them and helped them modernize what they had back then. But staying at IBM for about 4 years, basically explained to us, and we figure out what is a legacy storage vendor, because as you've mentioned, hey, IBM is selling products that if they ended the bar could order a drink, and the company itself is over a century old. So if you want to really figure out what's a legacy vendor, what are legacy products, spending years as IBM executives really teach you that lesson. So when we ended up, most of us leaving IBM 2011, after getting very, very good school over there, we've basically said, hey, we don't want to do anything more with the storage industry, basically because of the issues that we all know storage industry has. And I'm going to show a very quick slide articulating the issues. So what problems do the legacy vendors have? What are the issues we were shying away after we left XAV? We left IBM, basically said, hey, we want to run as far away from it as we can. So if we look at the storage vendors, they all have many, many products. IBM has almost 100 products. NetApp has well over 50. Dell EMC has well over 50. Pure Storage, if you look at them, and they are quite a young legacy vendor, have well over 10 products. So they all have a lot of products. They are all selling proprietary hardware, which is tough for them, from their ability to manage what they're selling, and also, by the way, hit profit. If we look at Pure, all through these years and the billions of revenue, they're still unprofitable. When they sell their proprietary perpetual license product, it also means that they cannot run well on the cloud. They never solved scaling in a reasonable way, and they never solved the ability to run mixed workloads, so different requirement of storage on the same platform. So customers end up getting tons of silos. Obviously, if you have to buy different products for different applications, you have silos. And most of these products, once are installed for the first time, and some of them, once they go out of the manufacturing, are stuck with that config. So customers have to go through some upfront sizing. That's never a good thing, because either they buy too big, so they've wasted, and they have to buy too big many times, because if they grow out of that solution, they have to replace it midlife, or they're buying too small and they have to replace it midlife. Now, if you go at the market itself, customers are stuck buying 4 main storage categories that today are just not good for what they're trying to do. So if they were going for performance, they would buy direct attached or block or SAN. The last time a direct attach company was really successful was Fusion.io, then NVMe commoditized it. Now, both of them don't let you share data. Moore's Law basically mandated that everything now, Moore's Law dying mandated that everything now is scale out. So you need to share data. So you're going to use your filers, NetApp, Isilons, still 2 good solutions, but if they enter the bar, they would be able to order a drink. So they solve the problems customers had in the 90s, and they don't scale well and they don't have good performance. And if you're trying to scale, you're going to object storage, but then performance really sucks and you have to go port your application to object storage. So we came with Weka and we recreated storage. So we're creating a new category of storage, our data platform, and we create a product that is unlike the old generation of storage product. It has the NAS ease of use. It's faster than direct attach or SAN. It has the scalability of object storage, billions of files in a directory, trillions of files in the namespace. By the way, it has object storage semantics as well, if you like them. We were selling enterprise storage for IBM. We know what the features are. We support them, but we run on standard someone else's hardware. So you can buy us from all the major hardware vendors, and we run on the cloud. So the same solution exactly runs both on, let's say, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise servers or Supermicro and AWS. We're an AWS primary storage competency partner. We support hybrid cloud, so you can actually have a morph between your on-prem and the cloud. And once we add the other clouds, we'll have cloud liquidity, and supporting Kubernetes actually enables you to have the exact same runtime environment from the applications perspective on the different clouds and on the on-prem. We also tackle backup and workload migration into the same solution, because at our capacities, it's very difficult and expensive to replicate it to other solutions. And finally, with linear scale, we run mixed workloads, so you don't have to do the upfront sizing. So we, in essence, we're solving the big problems of the storage, the big data market on-prem and in the cloud. So a single product goes after what customers are looking for. We're hardware independent, cloud native. We have an unlimited scale, and you don't need any upfront sizing, because you start at the capacity that you need, at the performance that you need, and we're going to take you to where you're going to need in the future. Does it make sense? I think you're on mute, Chris.
I can see where you're coming from, and I have an idea of what you want to achieve. You've blogged there are 6 attributes that customers can use to assess whether or not a vendor has a legacy approach. Expanding on them, that's what I'd like to talk about most today. So could you just run through the 6 attributes, please?
Definitely, Chris. So I'll present another slide. Don't worry, this is the last slide for this morning or your evening. So these are aspects that help you identify the legacy storage vendors. Now, you don't have to hit all 6, but if you're hitting, I think, 2 or more, and if your vendors hit 2 or more, you're in danger of buying from a legacy storage vendor. So as I said, Pure is a young legacy storage vendor. So you don't have to be a century old to be a legacy storage vendor. So if you're buying proprietary hardware, or as Chris's original piece said proprietary, you're probably buying from a proprietary vendor that's going to lock you. And then it probably also means that you're going to use a different solution, maybe from that vendor, to run your on-premises and the cloud, but it's not a clear continuum. It doesn't run the exact same thing. The scale or the performance or the different requirements to run different workloads force you to have different silos, which is expensive and hard to manage. If you're switching to GPUs, which chances are you will, these solutions don't support GPUs natively, and they don't support them well, or they don't support them in a cost-effective way. You have to go and buy other products for data protection. So backup or archive or maybe DR, which ends up being more complex and expensive. And if a vendor forces you to buy different products to get your job done and integrate them, it also probably means they didn't think of your problems and your problems tomorrow in an inclusive, coherent way, in a holistic way. So you're buying from a legacy vendor that was stitching solutions one on top of the other. And obviously, we're going to discuss all of these points to bigger depth.
Yes, please. And the first one I'd like to look at is proprietary hardware. And I'd like to hold up an example of proprietary hardware. This fine, fine device I have here in my hand. Why is non-proprietary hardware so important?
So to begin with, it's indeed incredible what mobile devices were able to become in the last few years. But there is a few stark differences between a mobile phone and high-end enterprise-grade storage. And high-end enterprise-grade storage and the IT environment keeps changing. And you know that every year you have different requirements. Usually what you did last year, a couple of years ago, appears easy, but you're not certain that you can achieve the same things today, especially when GPUs come in, especially when the cloud comes in, especially when the new workloads come in. When you're buying from a hardware vendor, you're buying the same solution over 3 or 4 or 5 years. And if you're buying it at the end of the cycle, you're buying 3 or 4 or 5 years old product. You know, when Pure Storage released FlashBlade, Weka and FlashBlade were somewhat comparable. But now we don't even think FlashBlade is a reasonable comparison. And because we are advancing with technology, Intel has 3 generations since, and next month we are actually going to hear announcements both from AMD around Milan and Intel around Ice Lake. We're going to take part in both announcements, and you're going to see what you're going to get. So IT technology advances very quickly. And the legacy storage vendor, just because of the economies of scale, cannot afford to release products in the pace that technology changes. Now, if you look at mobile devices, customers buy mobile devices in a week more than what storage vendors sell collectively in a year. So Apple releases 3 and sometimes 4 versions every year, getting you to the new technology. But it's not just Apple. You have Samsung releasing several times a year. Google releases Pixel several times a year, and the other vendors, basically because the economies of scale allows them to do it. That's not possible with IT.
Okay, so we're basically all enjoying the benefits of having a single x86 platform, but that's threatened with fracture. We've got smart NICs like Bluefield from NVIDIA. We've got the Pensando chip. We've got Fungible's DPU processing unit. These are all coming onto the scene. Can Weka support these as well as the basic commodity hardware platform?
That's actually a terrific question, because up until now, when we showed, hey, it's not just Intel went with AMD, but the strength of being software only is the ability to say, hey, ARM makes sense. It reduces cost dramatically. It improves flexibility. And we definitely are going to support DTUs from the Bluefield from NVIDIA, and the other ones we will end up supporting ARM servers that you're starting to see some hyperscalers provide. So this is another big advantage for not having your proprietary team, because if you as a customer say, hey, we have strategy of switching to ARM, we have a strategy of switching to ARM for a portion of what you're doing, you could still run Weka, and it's going to function exactly as your Weka that runs on the x86 that up until now you were able to choose between Intel and AMD.
Okay, the picture I'm getting is that it's as if a common platform of commodity hardware provides a kind of a high volume foundation on top of which suppliers like yourself, many suppliers, can develop software. So that makes a good sense. Let's turn to hybrid clouds. And the second attribute you mentioned, which in the way I see it is there shouldn't be a hybrid cloud software chasm between the on-premises world and the public cloud environments. You believe that the software environment, when running an application on premises and in the public clouds, should be the same. Is that right?
Definitely. Because when we're talking with CIOs, when we're talking with IT leaders, they're thinking about their next iteration of the digital transformation. What has been transferred to the cloud up until now for most companies is actually their auxiliary services. They didn't transfer their bread and butter functionality to the cloud. And usually they've used some others SaaS services to just replace something they did in-house, similar to like the outsourcing movement we've seen decades ago, just changes the name. So it makes this outsourcing easier. But now organizations, once they've diversed all the things they don't actually do, they don't run their business to the cloud, they want to figure out how to do it. And what they're figuring out and what they're seeing is that the cloud works very well for elasticity. If you're just taking 10 on-prem servers and you're going to run them as 10 instances and you're trying to use the cloud storage services, you're going to see that A, you're not going to get the enterprise features you're used to running your business on the cloud, and B, it's going to end up being insanely expensive, several times more expensive. So what smart customers are doing, they're leveraging the cloud for elasticity because this is the strength of the cloud. Now they're switching what they're doing on-prem to running cloud-like, and then they want to switch to cloud. Big problem of running on-prem is that the utilization is very, very low if you must run everything you're doing on your on-prem data centers. And usually we're seeing numbers from 20 to 40% utilization. And then you're saying, hey, this is very expensive. Why do we see the 20 to 40% of utilization? So to begin with, DR, disaster recovery, if you need to have a dormant data center that's everything it's doing is waiting for the disaster, you're wasting tons of resource. So leveraging the cloud for DR, making sure, hey, I run most of what I do on my data center, but if it fails, I can switch to the cloud. I spin up the instances, then I only pay for the disaster when disaster happens. Now you're going from 20 to 40% to 14 to 80%. And the next step customers are doing, and the smart customers are doing, they're leveraging the cloud for the burst. If you don't need to make sure you have enough spares to run everything you're doing, if now you have some extra thing you need to run, you can just burst it to the cloud. You can leverage spot instances and other ways to make it very effectively. And now you can run your on-prem at 70 to 90%. which saves you a lot of money, and you're leveraging the cloud for the burst and DR. And we're by enabling customers to run the exact same environment on-prem in the cloud, by providing enterprise software feature, enterprise storage features in the cloud, they are actually able to steer DR and bursting to the cloud. And we announced Kubernetes about half a year ago. And what we're seeing, a lot of customers are actually switching to Kubernetes to run on their private cloud on-prem and on the public cloud. And this basically allows their application teams to get very similar runtime environment across both worlds, so they can actually morph between the two.
Okay, I've got this little picture in my mind of the on-premises world being like the Atlantic Ocean, and the actual application workloads being ships. And they sail through this common software environment, a kind of Panama Canal, and emerge into the public cloud Pacific Ocean, and just carry on sailing with no change to the ship at all. So it clearly makes a great deal of sense. That's a good idea. The third legacy attribute you mentioned was about the topic of having separate silos for different workloads. What's the downside of this? It's horses for courses, surely. How does WekaIO say this is a bad thing and avoid doing it?
Right. So the downside of silos is that it increases the amount of management overhead you have, the administrative overhead you have. And it also means that you're having to pay several times for storing the same data. So I can just give you an example. When Genomics England, or GEL, switched to Weka, what they're saying in some of their talks is that they were able to go from several isolons to one large Weka, and they were able to go down from 10 admins to half an admin. This is a huge saving just by aggregating many systems to one system. But what happens with other providers, because you have to buy different storage systems to fulfill different requirements, you many times also are storing the same data in the different systems. And now you have to manage and make sure that they all have the up-to-date data. So you're not just paying several times of storing it over and over again, you actually have to spend energy making sure that what you are storing over and over again is the same, because now you're at risk that some of your applications are not up to date. So Weka allows you to not have to go and manage, sometimes we go into a customer and then they have 200 NetApps because they couldn't get enough aggregate performance. Think about the customer switching from a 200 NetApps to a single Weka. The amount of simplicity, the amount of saving is incredible. And this is what going out of silos, and this is frankly something that most companies cannot even comprehend. It's difficult for them to imagine not running, dozens and hundreds of storage systems and just buying a single one.
It's clearly a good idea.
I need to interrupt, gentlemen. It's actually my turn really quickly to put in a poll question. So I'm going to put a poll question up on the screen. Great answers. Here is question number 1. We just recently talked about the cloud. So your poll question for those of you in the audience is, what is the one challenge that is currently holding you back from transitioning more of your workloads to the cloud? Please choose your answer, and we will, I see they're coming up already. And we'll keep this on the screen for just a few minutes. Gentlemen, let's move along to the next question.
All right, thank you, Lynn. It's a reasonable idea, sure enough, that the fewer storage silos you have, the better. You mentioned admin staff as one very good reason for that. But the silo scene isn't static. There's a new silo emerging, and that's connected to artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we know that AI and machine learning applications now use GPUs. NVIDIA has its GPU direct storage. Does your fourth attribute, hobbled GPU hardware, as I see it in my own mind, suggest that a legacy product makes poor use of such GPU hardware?
So definitely, and we see that over and over again. When customers switch to Weka, they actually get the results done in a small fraction of the time. So we have examples of like a 7-day instead of 70-day, 4 hours instead of 80 hours. So we're seeing tremendous improvements through customers switching to us. And the thing is, GPUs are relatively new. If you go back 5 years, which by the way, as we started, is usually the length of time proprietary tin vendors actually sell their boxes. 5 years ago, there were no GPUs. No one used them. No, NVIDIA stock was way, way, way lower. And then it all became really apparent that, hey, this is the new way to solve IT problems in the last 2, 3, 4 years. Now, GPUs are so much more efficient than CPUs in storing and processing data. You look at NVIDIA's Rapids, they can go through 20 to 30 gigabytes a second on a single GPU. And now they're building these boxes. When you put 8 of these on one box with 8 200 gig interfaces, so you actually need to go through so much data. And if you're leveraging the older protocols, you're just not going to be able to feed them fast enough. And what happens, you're wasting these expensive boxes away, and you're standing in your own way of beating your competitors. So we're showing, for example, that on a DGX A100, we can reach about over 20 gigabytes a second on each one of the 8 links it has. So in effect, we get the GPUs fully fed with data.
Okay, I think I may have you here. To mention a favorite old name, NetApp, and another legacy supplier such as Data Direct Networks, and a couple of new ones, Pavilion and Vast Data. They can also ship data at 100 or 150 plus gigabytes a second to GPU Direct to DGX A100 GPU servers. How would you say Weka's better than them? They're surely doing exactly the same as you.
So A, not all legacy vendors have all the bits of the legacy vendors turned on. But B, if you're looking at Weka compared to the competition, you know, Weka is considered to be not on the inexpensive part, but when you're actually counting dollars per throughput, dollars per gigabytes a second, Weka is by far the cheapest vendor. So if what you're trying to do is actually buy a bunch of these GPU servers and feed them in hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes per second, any other vendor is going to be significantly more expensive for these kind of performance. This is one thing. And another thing to look on the other vendors, Weka is incredibly efficient on the CPU usage for the GPU Direct Storage Protocol. So, and this is actually something that NVIDIA shows when you look at the CPU utilization, Weka is very, very low. For example, if you look at the DDN numbers, they're almost using 100% of the CPUs, and you need the CPUs to drive data to the GPUs. So while with some other vendors, you could show, hey, I can run that amount of IO. Now the question is, could the server actually utilize this IO and run compute? And with Weka, you can actually use all this IO, and it's going to cost less than anyone else.
You're talking about CPUs in the GPU server itself, are you?
Yes, definitely, because the GPUs actually are only fulfilling a small portion of the workload that gets accelerated very good on the GPU, but a lot of the other part of the processing actually happen on the CPU. And if you look at the DGX A100, NVIDIA, when they are putting 8 GPUs, actually put 2 AMD processors with 128 threads each, so 256 threads. If NVIDIA didn't think they needed CPUs, they wouldn't put so much power on from the CPU perspective on their servers.
Okay, it's a good point. The 5th legacy product marker is that data protection is not built in. And I've got an instant problem with that, because I see data protection, having an external data protection vendor for an enterprise as being a good idea. If I can protect all my applications with one data protection vendor's product, that makes life simple for me. I don't have to deal with multiple vendors' products. And I think you're saying that this is not a good idea. Why is that?
So it's a bit more complex than that, because part of what you've said is a good idea, and we actually adhere to it. You do want part of your data protection to be stored on a separate vendor with separate media that is independent, and we do it to the fullest. So what we're doing at Weka, we actually let you extend your namespace between the extreme high performance NVMe and some third-party object storage. You can do it for a single object storage, and you can actually pick two of them. So you can have one on premises and one in the cloud. And we store the data in a way that is independent, if you're taking a snapshot and store it on the object storage, from how the original Weka that stores it actually works. So you can spin up a separate Weka cluster, and it can be way smaller or way bigger, access this data and keep running. And this is how you can actually start running on-prem, save snapshots to AWS S3, and you can spin up a Weka on AWS, which is completely different spec, and it will keep running. And once we've established that Weka actually support the 3-2-1 data archive, data backup rule to the fullest, now you're asking yourself, hey, if I have to back up dozens of petabytes, if I want to back up a lot of my separate applications, how do I do it in an effective way? And if you look at what our competitors are doing, then you're going to store the data several times. So we'll store it once for the ability to present the namespace in a very effective and very efficient manner. You're going to store it again for backup and archive, and yet another time for disaster recovery and burst. So doing it one time with Weka saves you a lot of the admin overhead, going back to the 10 to half admins at Genomics England. But it also saves you quite a lot of money on not having to buy the same capacity over and over again for the different functionalities.
Suppose I suggest to you that one way of looking at what you're saying is that an intrinsic feature of a data storage infrastructure should be that it protects the data it stores, because it's simpler that way and better than having external, separate, third-party data protection products. Is that right?
It's right, because, backup is also not easy. And companies end up backing up the thing that are most crucial. When we make backup an afterthought, it just happens. Also, more of the data is backed up. And you're going to get the same, security protection that you're getting. So if you want to encrypt your data, it's going to be encrypted. It's going to be encrypted on the other platform. By the way, you get easy ransomware protection. So you're getting a lot of the tools you would be getting with the other data management, data protections from other ones that you'll have to go explicitly purchase and integrate and verify, just as your day-to-day streamlined operations very, very easily.
Okay. It seems to me that I'm getting a hint of a consolidation play here, but I'll talk about that in a moment. You added a sixth attribute to the blog post you made after the tweet, and that was that many products needed to be integrated together with a legacy vendor approach in order to solve different problems for the same customer. Again, I'm coming at this and thinking, well, that's fine. That's different horses for different courses. What's wrong with this? Why is this multi-product integration idea a bad thing?
It's a bad thing because it's wasteful both in how many systems you're running, how much times you're storing the same data, and how many human resources you need to manage it. So with Weka, we actually let you access the same data with our incredible performance POSIX which is actually better than SAN. So you don't need to buy SAN, for example, to run some database workloads. We let you also access it with NFS for your legacy applications. We let you access it with SMB, with all the integrations of, ACLs and Active Directory and encryption and the other things you would expect. We support NVIDIA's GPU Direct Storage, and we support the fastest S3 interface. So if you want to run stateless for a serverless, or get your devices to put the data directly with S3, you can all do it over the same data. Further, you don't have to configure and to size Weka to run differently. So if you run small IOs, you're going to get incredible low latency and our incredible highest IOPS number. But if you're running large IOs, you're going to get tremendous throughput, where if you compare to the other products, like you mentioned, GPFS, Spectrum Scale, and DDN, you have to have different file systems, even maybe on the same products, to support the different applications. So you end up tuning what you're doing to the fullest to run well. Now the application guys make a change, you have to redo it. Or you've put something on SAN, and now you need another way to access it, you're copying the data. So by allowing customers to access all their data through the different platforms, it fosters simplicity and tremendous saving. And also it will allow them, as we talked earlier, to change how they run. So if they introduce a GPU, it will magically start work well. If now a new CIO comes in and they need to burst to the cloud, they can do it as well.
There's one area which there's a word I've not heard you say, block. I've not heard you talk about block access. And many customers, many enterprises will have their databases and ERP products and things like that using WekaIO to a SAN. And you've mentioned object interfaces, S3, you've mentioned file interfaces, but not block interfaces. So what would you say to people who say, I've got a database, I access it by block, what can Weka do for me there?
So as you've mentioned in your opening remarks, we understand block remarkably well. So we've, unfortunately, I think I still had more years doing block than doing Weka. So we know these workloads. And what we're showing with Weka is that block is not needed anymore. So block was needed in the 80s and the 90s when, Ethernet just didn't cut it. And then you were using SCSI at the beginning, and SICON and FICON and Fiber Channel and all these protocols. And when we started XAV and we said, hey, we're going to commoditize it all and we'll use Ethernet in between, and people ridiculed us because Fiber Channel was a gigabit and Ethernet was fast, so 10x different. When we came to market, Fiber Channel was 4 gigabit and Ethernet was gigabit, and we showed you can actually trunk them. Nowadays, Ethernet is 100 and 200 gigabit, and most of the Fiber Channel market, it's still at 16. All right, some vendors announced more, but even the 32 or the 64, which were not adopted well, is slower than the 200 gig of Ethernet and 400 gig of InfiniBand. So the network is not the problem anymore. And we've created a storage, a data platform that actually doesn't have the metadata problems filers had previously. So you can run all your block applications on Weka using our POSIX interface, and you're going to get better performance than any all-flash array you can buy from the legacy vendors.
I'm getting a picture here of Weka coming into a customer on a predominantly file basis. We can process your file data, we can supply your file data faster than anybody else. We can scale it out higher than anybody else. We can provide cloud economics, we can do small files, we can do large files, and so on. But then you say, we can also do object storage. So there's that box ticked. And now you're saying block storage is not needed anymore. So are you thinking that Weka could actually gradually expand out and consolidate more and more of your enterprise customers' workloads?
Definitely. And that is the reason recently, and I think you've covered it as well, we're actually transitioning from calling ourselves storage, because when you're storage, you have to go and choose what kind of a storage are you, to saying, hey, Weka is actually a data platform. And we're the limitless data platform, because it doesn't matter what your needs are. It doesn't matter where you run them. It doesn't matter how big it is or how fast it needs to be. You can use Weka to basically support all of your data requirements. Now, and we have customers already transitioning from big data running Hadoop or Spark or the others to ours as well. And previously you had storage and then you had big data, because storage couldn't fulfill big data. But we're actually now showing that Weka is bigger than big data. So that's the reason we've changed from saying, hey, Weka is a file system, Weka is a storage product, to the limitless data platform.
When I first heard Weka describe itself as a data platform company, I thought to myself, yeah, you've hired yourself a marketing guy. But then, preparing for this webinar, I began to realize that I was coming into it with a mindset that said Weka was a one-trick pony, a very fast file delivering pony. But the picture you're painting and the things you said throughout this webinar are that Weka is in fact a whole herd of horses. Thank you for this discussion. I've enjoyed it a lot. I hope you have, and I hope our viewers have found it worthwhile as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise, likewise.
Thanks, Liran, as well. So before we close, now that we've talked about the 6 attributes of a legacy storage system, we have a poll. One more poll question. So let's launch the second poll question. And it is, which of the 6 attributes discussed today is the most limiting within your own data storage architecture? Running on proprietary hardware, using different public cloud offerings than on premises, storing the data in silos, getting the most out of your GPUs, using data protection as a third-party solution, or integrating many products to solve different problems for the same customer. We'll leave that up for just a minute, and we do have a question from the audience for you, gentlemen. So while the poll question is up and being answered, let's get on to the question. It has to do with the integration testing. So who does all of the integration testing and validation of all of these commodity components from the vendors?
Right. So another important thing to understand about Weka, we don't sell to the end user. You can view Weka like ARM. So it doesn't matter, and you've mentioned the mobile devices, it doesn't matter what mobile device you have in your pocket, you're gonna have a CPU there designed by ARM. But ARM doesn't have a fab. ARM doesn't build CPUs, and still it's in 100% of the phones. So the same thing is with Weka. We don't sell to the end users, and we have agreements with quite a lot of the server vendors and some storage companies today, and they take our IP, they build it into their own solution, they validate it, they verify it, and then they sell it to the end customer. So you can buy solutions that are completely vetted and tested and fully engineered from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, from Supermicro, from other server vendors. You can buy it from Hitachi Vantara. If you're actually buying the Hitachi Content Platform for File, HCSF, it runs Weka. And it's an incredibly well integrated solution when you have Weka running on the NVMEs, tiering to their HCP in the background, and you don't have to do anything. It comes with switches, it's come with the whole thing. So we work with basically the whole ecosystem to make sure that customers can buy what they need from the vendors they like, and we have validated solution with basically the whole market.
Is it slightly like saying that as VMware is to hypervisors, Weka is to file and block and object storage, that you're a cross-vendor layer.
And to the cloud. So so we allow you, because it doesn't matter. So you may like buying from Dell, you may like buying from Cisco, you may like buying from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, but maybe next year you're going to buy servers from other vendors. And storage shouldn't be dictated by what vendor you like buying today. So you can start by buying Weka from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, or maybe you want to say, hey, the DR side, I like HP for my main side. For the DR side, I want to be more cost conscious. I'm going to buy it from Supermicro, which they have incredibly well-designed servers, but slightly less supporting services around them. And you can do it. Or, you can buy Hitachi's HCSF on-prem and burst to AWS and run Weka. So it doesn't matter what servers, vendors you like buying your server from today. If you switch to Weka, it means that you're going to have good continuous operation through your decisions.
Okay.
And gentlemen, the polling questions have been answered, and I close the poll. It may interest you to know that the two attributes that are the most problems for our audience today are using proprietary hardware and storing data in silos. Not so much of a surprise, really. Is it to you, Liran and Chris?
I shall go away and cogitate.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're seeing that customers really don't like to be locked in to a single storage vendor. They start realizing that buying these proprietary hardware solutions that last for a few years, and then they have to bring in a forklift and replace them, because another good thing with Weka, as you're adding more servers, they age differently. We support heterogeneous hardware. When some of them are older, you choose if you're just adding more new ones and you take the risk, or you take them out, but you never actually have to bring a forklift with a completely new platform, perform the data transfer, wait for it to happen, the forklift takes it out. So once you consolidate to Weka, once you switch to this mode, so you unsubscribe from the proprietary box that lives for 4 years, it also simplifies how you're transitioning to newer and newer platforms.
I think one of the very great things about the storage industry in the recent years has been the adoption of having software-defined systems, and the software providing an abstraction layer over different generations of hardware. That's not complete across all vendors, but most really good vendors are providing that kind of service today. And what you're doing with that is excellent.
Yeah, thank you very much. So now we can quote Chris Mellor said that what we're doing is excellent.
Yeah, yes, and that we're not a one-trick pony, we're a whole herd of horses.
Also,
like that.
Stampede, baby, stampede.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining this Weka webinar. Join us on April 8th for our next Weka webinar, when we'll be talking with Tony Scott and Addison Snell. Addison is a well-known storage analyst, and Tony Scott is the former CIO, federal CIO of the federal government. They'll be talking about HPC and traditional IT, and having a little bit of a friendly sparring going back and forth, talking about those technologies. Thanks again to Liran. Thanks again to Chris. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on a Weka webinar.
Bye-bye, and thank you.
Bye, thanks.
Bye-bye.